The 360 on Energy and Carbon, hosted by 360 Energy. In his tenure at Sustainable Ocean Alliance, Brandon Levy has supported the next generation of ocean innovators with the training, resources, and networks they need to build nature-positive solutions and reach their full potential as human beings. In this capacity, Brandon has built the Ocean Leadership Program, created a grant program that has provided over $1 million of funding to over 200 grassroots projects in over 60 countries, spearheaded global leadership summits in collaboration with foreign governments, and provided integral coaching for young leaders worldwide. Now let's get into the episode with Brandon. Welcome back, John.
It's really good to be back.
Missing your counterpart today.
Yes. I mean, what trouble can we get ourselves into without Dave here today? Let's find out.
Well, today we're also joined by our guest, Brandon Levy. He is the Chief Program Officer at Sustainable Ocean Alliance. Welcome, Brandon.
Thank you, Lysandra. It's a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. And I think to kick off this episode, there's no better way than to ask, what is Sustainable Ocean Alliance?
Absolutely. Well, for many of your listeners, it may be a surprise that this episode is themed around a ocean NGO and the ocean at large. So just to zoom out with a little bit of context here, oceans are absolutely critical to our planet's climate system for our overall health. The oceans regulate temperatures, they host a vast array of biodiversity, and here's a crucial point that's often overlooked. They absorb about a quarter of all carbon emissions, acting as a massive carbon sink. Fortunately, the ocean, despite being so vast and the source of poetry around infinity and an endless inspiration for many, something that seemed incorruptible, is suffering the consequences of our unsustainable lifestyles, of climate change, of being that massive carbon sink. So we see things like ocean acidification as a direct result of climate change, and many different, like this polycrisis of all these different areas where we have mass extinction of coral reefs and all these diverse ecosystems that are beginning to suffer. And then, of course, many of us may be familiar, the gateway drug to understand ocean or to care about the ocean is sometimes plastics. So we have 10 million tons of plastic enter the ocean each year. And all of these threats are real, they're immediate, but we also see the potential for innovation in all this. And it's not necessarily as if the story is over. So here steps in Sustainable Ocean Alliance. We're a NGO, and what we do primarily is we activate young people, we develop and implement innovative solutions, and mobilize an ocean workforce in order to restore the health of our ocean. And we are being a bit ambitious, but we think that with the right level of capital, the right combination of programming, and the proper reach, which we're going for the globe here, we can do that in one lifetime, really turn the tide and restore the health of our ocean within our lifetime. So in doing so, we've built the world's largest network of young ocean leaders. Now, we've supported innovative startups, nonprofits, and grassroots campaigns that are dedicated to solving some of these aforementioned threats and beyond that are facing our planet and our seas. And we take a unique approach to solving a lot of these challenges. We're not your typical NGO that's doing necessarily like a lot of research and campaigning and such, although that is part of what we do as well to an extent. But we're really looking at, focused on youth-led and highly innovative solutions. And our focus is to allocate funding across all sorts of different projects, from nonprofit grants to market-driven startup investments to local initiatives, to really take this portfolio approach so that we have a diverse community of ocean solutions being supported around the globe. And in aggregate now, I've been with the organization for the past 5 years rather, and within that time, our team has been able to support over 266 of these ocean projects, or solutions as we call them, across 77 countries. So just to get a sense of really the reach there. And our hope is that we can continue to do this on bigger and bigger scales. 266 is just the start. We're going for the top projects that really have outsized impact around climate and around ocean health. We've thus far been able to mobilize around $1.6 million of capital through these different forms of investments and grants that have gone to these 266 plus projects. And one thing that's really wonderful that we like to humbly brag about on behalf of our startups is that they've gone on to raise over $300 million of follow-on capital. So there's a real positive track record that we're seeing. And SOA continues to find innovative ways to support this entire ecosystem of solutions from its inception. Let's say you're just a young kid and growing up in the coast of Kenya and you see mangroves being destroyed. Well, we can provide you with a grant to help facilitate the regrowth and the replanting of those mangroves in your local area. But let's say that same person becomes entrepreneurial and wants to create a for-profit initiative. Well, then there'll be a potential investment for that individual or in that team to do that. And let's say they already have an investment, or they're already off and running. They've built their prototype. They've reached their first customer. They're looking to scale even more and raise more funds. We provide follow-on capital too through a very small venture capital fund called Seabird Ventures. So really trying to service this whole ecosystem and not just do it through money, because that's just like honestly, it's a small part of what we do. We also are really trying to do our best to provide mentorship to as many people as possible. We have over 200 mentors from all over the world who have volunteered their time to support these projects. And often these are really critical relationships, especially for youth-led projects. And by youth, we define youth as 18 to 35 years of age. Maybe by the time I get a little closer to 35, because I'm near there now, we'll raise it a little higher. But no, it's important that we're really looking at those places where funding doesn't necessarily flow. So we really look at indigenous communities. We look at the next generation of ocean change makers from these diverse communities across our planet and try to equip them with what they need to do to advance their projects, or to even inspire them to start a project, to know that they can do something. They don't just have to live with the consequences of prior generations and how we've mistreated the planet. They can be part of a solution and take matters into their own hands. So SOA, in essence, is a platform to enable that.
Thank you for that.
That is really impressive. And you've talked some big sums of money there. And one of the things we like to do when we've got guests is we like people to understand, shall we say, if I say where they're coming from. And by that, one of the questions I want to ask you is, SOA, how is it funded? Who funds you? Because the reason I ask that is we've got lots of NGOs, pressure groups, all sorts of people out there. And somebody once said, if you want to know what their position is, find out where their funding comes from. Mm-hmm. So if we can get that one cleared out to space. So how are you funded?
Yeah, it's a great question. And one I think should be asked of really all nonprofits in the space, because there needs to be some level of resourcing for your venture to survive. I would say before I answer that question, which I will make sure I do, we are trying to take a different approach really to the nonprofit space, in the sense of we'd like to raise enough capital where through our investments, because we take a little bit of equity in the startups that we invest in, right? We'll write them like $100,000 checks. We'll take a very founder-friendly equity take there. And the idea is that we'll, over time, as these ventures become successful, as they liquidate, as they exit to whatever extent that they do, that SOA will begin to get paid back. And as this nonprofit entity, we can use that revenue to fund more projects.
Yep.
So there is a threshold that we're trying to reach. We don't quite know down to the dollar amount what that is of money we'd have to raise to actually be a sustainable nonprofit financially. But that is our goal, is to kind of break the mold rather than having to, go and ask for funding in each yearly cycle. But
Yeah.
primarily we're funded through a combination of sources. So we receive support from philanthropic foundations, corporate sponsorships, individual donors, different partnerships with organizations that have like real mission alignment. And at times we've collaborated with governments, with academic institutions, with other private sector entities around specific funding for specific projects. To give you some names if you're curious about that, one of our earliest and biggest funders has been the founder and CEO of Salesforce, Mark Benioff. Several of you may know of him. Yeah, he has become a fantastic benefactor to the entire ocean space, but specifically to Sustainable Ocean Alliance. And he's really believed in us from the beginning and gave us I believe it was on the stage at Davos, the annual World Economic Forum meeting in 2019, where he pledged or basically explained the goal that our organization had to hit 100 solutions by 2021, as in support with capital and investment and other forms of mentorship and programming by 2021. And we actually more than doubled that goal, and we were able to hit 222 solutions by that same year. So I believe he was pleased with that. He's been a big ally too. And yes, and he's been a really big ally to bring in other funders to our fold, into the fold as well. So we continue to look at a broad array of ways to raise funds through the more typical channels and through high net worth individuals who really have a deep care and mission and value alignment with what we're trying to do as an organization.
That's interesting. You talk about the mission alignment and that. So sort of supplemental to that, we've seen things here in the UK of museums and other organisations like that have suddenly turned around and said, well, people have said, hold on, you're taking money from big oil. We don't think you should be doing that. And I don't want to get too embroiled in that, but presumably, or in fact, you have said it, you look for mission-aligned funders rather than people who are just, how can we put it, trying to say they're doing something good by doing it. Would that be?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I know you work in energy, so you're quite familiar with greenwashing.
Yeah.
I imagine.
Yes.
Yes. So we have the same thing happen, of course, in the ocean sustainability world. We call it blue washing, and you got to
Why not? Brilliant.
Why not? Yeah, brilliant. I didn't come up with it, but I use that term, and I'm wary of certain actors, and I'm not going to name them, but
no, we can't.
That are either very large plastic producers or cruise ships,
yes,
or other historical polluters that aren't really doing much to turn the tide because it's so counter to their business model that if they were to do it, they may not exist anymore. So we have to be very careful. Of course, it can be tempting to look at funds of any type when you are trying to fund a reception for youth and, the clock is ticking. But we've gotten to be pretty savvy about our discernment of who to work with. And to your point, it remains really important to accept the right type of money for whatever we do.
That's great. Thank you.
Brandon, you mentioned over 220 solutions. Are you able to give us some examples of these solutions that SOA has funded?
Oh, I'd be happy to. This is one of my favorite things to talk about, just because it really sparks something in my own brain of, wow, yes, the problems are pretty significant, but don't doubt human ingenuity. Wade Davis, who's an anthropologist and a photographer and one of my own personal heroes, he has this quote where he says, "Despair is an insult to the imagination," which really hits, because some of these that I'll rattle off for you now are really taking liberties and harnessing the full creative power of this moment to respond to our biggest challenges. So I'll give you a couple. First, Cruise Foam. They're a startup that has created an alternative to styrofoam, which is, you know, historically horrible for the planet. And the alternative is made out of natural biopolymers, such as discarded shrimp shells. So looking at things that normally would be trash and turning them into these biodegradable packaging products. Really, really important venture here. We also have supported and have a close relationship with a startup called Coral Vita. They recently won actually the Earthshot Prize a year or two ago, which is this big innovation prize that Prince William and Mike Bloomberg and others support. And their innovation is they're able to grow corals up to 50 times faster than in nature. Wow. And they make them more resilient to climate change because the corals they grow in these labs and then plant in coral nurseries and into the ocean are heat resistant, or heat resilient rather. And that is really critical because I mentioned it earlier, ocean acidification, because of the heavy load that the ocean's taking on to basically absorb our excess carbon debt and emissions. It's taking a big chunk out of the vitality of our coral reefs globally, to the point where by 2100 we may lose all of them, even at 1.5 to 2 degrees of warming. So having alternatives to corals is really important. There are several fisheries is a whole nother field that we can talk about too, but we support several projects that create algae-based aquaculture feed that results in larger, healthier fish and also reduces overfishing in the wild. Verdant Seas is one that is really leading in that space. Finless, speaking also on the seafood front, Finless Foods is a really successful startup, and they create delicious. Well, I haven't tried it yet, so I just want to caveat it. But I hear it's delicious, and I love sushi. But they create delicious alternative seafood products that are plant-based and cell-based, which with this goal to change the way the world eats. So many of you who may be like me and love sushi and love spicy tuna or whatever, unfortunately, you don't order the bluefin tuna anymore. You shouldn't, because it's near extinction. So they're using means in the laboratory to create a plant-based and cell-based alternative that actually tastes like this, and it's not. It's something that I think could really take off given people's love for sushi and the real need for alternatives here. And as I'm stoking everyone's appetites here, another thing that may sound good to you, may not, but I've tried this and it is indeed delicious. Akua, A-K-U-A, Akua. They're a startup that creates kelp-based food, so like seaweed. And whether it's burgers, which I have tried, jerky, other things that can help feed us sustainably while sequestering carbon from the atmosphere in the process, given that that's one of the key things that kelp and seaweed do for us and the planet. There are other really fascinating startups. Ellipsis Earth is one that I like to talk about, as it uses drone footage from around the world to create a plastic waste heat map, which can help with collection efforts. So they have this team of folks that are experts at flying drones. They'll fly it over like the Ganges River in India or other places in Asia. And through AI and machine learning can know exactly where the waste is, what type of waste it is, where it's coming, so you can trace waste all the way upstream, which is really key. And rivers are actually a key piece of this, because 90% of our plastic in the ocean comes from rivers. In fact, it just comes from not like 10 rivers, and 9 of 10 of them are in Asia. So this is when you look at leverage points in this broader systemic challenge of how do you stem the tide and turn off the plastic tap, rivers are really key. And Ellipsis Earth is giving, through this drone footage and this plastic waste heat map, will help us better understand the source of the plastic to hopefully stem the tide of it. There are many others I can go into, because we've supported over 45 startups. And, and there are also other projects that are not for profit. I'm just so far only given you the for-profit ones, but
Oh, right.
yeah, all one I can name because I think it's relevant a bit to the topic is called Carbon Ethics. They're based out of Indonesia, and they'll sequester carbon through conservation and restoration of coastal habitats like seagrass
Yeah.
and mangroves, and they have a platform for folks to go on and actually offset some of their carbon. So a lot of
Great.
great initiatives happening both on the grassroots level and on the for-profit innovation level.
Thanks
Thank
for
you for
that.
that.
So many interesting examples. Yeah.
Yeah, and it is interesting. We think of being fed from the seas, but we think of that as being, fish and shellfish, but actually sort of plant-based coming from the sea. Okay, the question I've got to ask is one that I don't align with, but I'm going to ask it. And it's, I don't live anywhere near the sea. In fact, where I am in the UK, I'm almost in the centre of the UK. So I'm about as far away from the sea as I can be. So why should I be interested in oceans?
It's a great question. I've met people that are removed from the oceans and live in inland states in the US, and it's not
Yeah.
necessarily, there's this adage of like, or maybe an incorrect line of thinking that to protect the ocean, you have to be near the ocean. But the reality is we all have direct impact on the cycles of life in the ocean, no matter where we live, agnostic to your geography. So I mentioned that in order to address some of the largest threats facing our oceans, like rising temperatures, which lead to acidification, that actually involves lowering your carbon emissions. I mentioned how plastics are winding up through the rivers, which rivers are all over, especially inland places, and are a direct line to the ocean. So reducing our plastic on a day-to-day. And then other areas where we can safeguard our watersheds and promote marine protected areas and fight for legislation, and really to rally your senators and your representatives and parliamentary members wherever you live to support policy that is in favor of ocean, waterways, and climate. So all of this can happen no matter where you are, which is really key. After all, when you look at the ocean, it's doing a lot more than what's just contained from shore to shore. They're regulating the climate. It provides oxygen and support of a vast array of ecosystems and biodiversity. Therefore, the well-being of the ocean affects everyone. We're interdependent with it. And that includes the food we eat, the climate we experience, the economy we participate in. So efforts in favor of ocean sustainability or promoting ocean sustainability can help address broader issues like climate change and pollution and overfishing, which have far-reaching consequences.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thanks for a great episode, Brandon. To end this episode off, what is the biggest takeaway for our listeners?
Yeah, well, there are many takeaways I can give you. I hope that you leave this episode better understanding a bit of why the oceans play such a crucial role in shaping our future and where, really where we're at. And also just inspired to get more involved wherever you are. So Sustainable Ocean Alliance has a network of hubs. We have 80 hubs, which are volunteer-led groups that are on the ground working more on a local level. And the key here that we're trying to really rally everyone around is like, how can we support people to act locally, coordinate regionally, and to think globally around all of their different work. So what you're doing on a local level, how can you expand the sphere so that you're collaborating with more and more people? And that starts to build movements. And then we can start to get bottom up momentum to hold our public representatives accountable so that there's more and more legislative support. There's also a real need for money in this space. So many of you are familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. Yeah, and there's 17 of them. Ocean is the 14th, the SDG 14, which is life underwater. You want to guess which of the 17 of those SDGs, so Sustainable Development Goals, are least funded? Which is the least funded goal?
Well, I'm wondering, could it be yours?
It's the ocean, yeah. So it's pretty crazy. There's a funding gap of around 150, a funding gap of around 150 billion dollars per year.
Wow.
So
Wow.
that's really what we need to support. Like when on one hand, it is very impressive that SOA has been able to give millions of dollars to these projects and to support all of these solutions, but we need billions, and we are looking for investors to co-invest alongside us in these solutions and for philanthropic capital to help us scale our efforts. The second thing I would say would be like we need more people to really dedicate their lives to building and supporting these types of solutions. You don't need to necessarily be an entrepreneur or an engineer or a leader or whoever, but if there's some way that your unique worldview or skill set or just care for our planet, if we can leverage that, you can help this movement at large. So we have a online platform that we'll be launching around Climate Week for anyone who really wants to get involved and support what we're doing and become an ally for the Sustainable Ocean Alliance. So I encourage you to stay tuned, sign up for our newsletter, go to soalliance.org and make sure that you're up to date so that when that platform is launched, you'll be able to really find your place in how you can best contribute to this broader goal of restoring the health of our ocean in our lifetime. And third, the solutions that we're working with, they require pilot, scale, and implementation partners. So we're looking for governments at all levels, corporations, and philanthropy to work with us so that we can bring these solutions into the market. Because really, we're looking at a certain timetable here. The IPCC will say that, hey, we have less than 8 years to act. So these ventures need to scale in a very short period of time so that they can usurp these industry incumbents that are inherently unsustainable and claim market share and ultimately be providing the products and the services that are aligned with our planet. So that is what I'll leave you with. And I hope that I see you all on our platform and part of this movement to help our oceans help us.
Thanks, Brandon. John, what's your biggest takeaway?
Well, I'm really impressed that use goes up to 35. What does resonate with me, because of some other things that I'm doing and looking at, if we want longer term solutions, we've got to engage young people. And I think there's so many points I could pick out of what we've discussed, but I think my big takeaway is we have to actively engage young people in everything we're doing about sustainability.
Yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Yeah, sorry.
No worries. I think for me, the biggest takeaway is, when we talk about carbon offsets and things like that, I often hear things like, growing trees. But now that I was thinking of it during this episode and you were explaining all these great initiatives, I rarely hear of anyone doing anything with the ocean. And of course, that's probably the bubble I'm in. But I do think that there's so much opportunity there. And I really hope this episode educates a lot of people on what's out there and how we can help, again, further reduce the impacts of climate change.
Absolutely. And for your listeners, if you happen to be an entrepreneur, identify as an entrepreneur, have a project that you're looking to gain support on, we have just announced the opening of our application for the Ecopreneur Network. So rather than having just an accelerator that's time-bound, we've created this program that involves lifelong support for folks. So once you're part of this network, you can be working with our team, making sure that you're having the right level of support at each stage of your life cycle. So if you go to soalliance.org and click on Ecopreneur Network, you'll see how you can benefit from these tailored curated services. And we hope that through personalized mentorship, through guidance, through workshops, through introductions to investors and partners, that we will make that journey for you as a startup all the more easier and all the more successful, because our oceans need that. So yeah, just a quick plug. If you are an entrepreneur, you know an entrepreneur that is in this space or interested in learning more, please apply by August 1st in order to be considered for the class of 2023 for our Ecopreneur Network.
All right. Well, thank you both for your time today.
Oh, thank you. Looking forward to the next one.
That's all for today's episode of the 360 on Energy and Carbon podcast. Thanks for listening. Make sure to check us out on our website at 360energy.net and follow us on LinkedIn at 360energy Inc. Tune in to our podcast on Apple Music, Spotify, Anchor, or other listening platforms by searching the 360 on Energy and Carbon. You can watch the video recording and subscribe on YouTube at 360 Energy Inc. Email us your feedback at podcast@360energy.net or comment on our LinkedIn posts. See you next week.